Right, I think it's recording now. Yeah, I see a green light. Alright, this is a very simple how-to assembly guide for the HPA bottle rig. Basically, pictured here is your second stage regulator components. What you'll need along with this is some plumber's tape. I've used pink because it's really thick and you only need to apply 1 or 2 wraps in order to achieve a proper seal within your threads. You will not need plumber's tape for this seal here, as there's O-rings here. The only thing that isn't actually pictured here is your fill adapter. I forgot to order this when I was ordering all of these components, and in its absence, I guess just sort of imagine it screwed onto here, and when done, this thread here will actually screw into the side of the fill adapter, and that will fit all on here. So basically, we'll begin with the simple construction of the second stage regulator. The whole purpose of this is actually to regulate the pressure down from 300 psi. Now, in a standard HPA bottle, a regulator will output at about 800 psi. However, in this HPA rig, which is specifically designed for Nerf purposes, it's actually the Ninja Pro V2 SLP regulator. This SLP means super low pressure. It means it's outputting at 300 psi, and as such, I've actually sourced a 300 psi inlet pressure regulator that outputs between 0 and 125 psi in order to effectively use Nerf volumes with a high flow rate instead of paintball volumes, which are quite low but use high pressure. So Nerf systems in general use high volume, low pressure. Paintball tanks use high pressure and low volume. This sort of inlet. Okay, so when you're looking at your regulator, ignore the not for bottled gas in this one because we are using bottled air, which is different to bottled gas. This arrow here indicates your inlet. You want to make sure that your 1/8 hex nipple actually fits inside that. The other end of this will go in your fill adapter, as said before. So I'll quickly just wrap that with some plumber's tape. Because this is pink, I'm only going to apply 1 or 2 wraps. That's just to seal it on nice and proper. Snap it off as such, and use your thumb to press in the threads, and then finding that, basically begin threading. Thread backwards first until you feel it press a little further in. That enables you to find the threads properly without stripping any in the process. You'll be able to tighten it relatively evenly for about 5 to 6 rolls. Then you'll need a wrench. I'm not sure if this wrench actually fits this thread. I sized it to the plug. So I'm going to use the adjustable wrench to actually just shorten this. So tighten it down to the correct tightness. And basically, I'm going to exert more torque by actually threading the regulator. Whoops, which I dropped. Thread the regulator onto the inlet. Now, don't over tighten. When you feel more resistance than you think would be necessary, stop. You don't want to over tighten threads as that A ruins your seal and B ruins the threads, and that makes bad longevity problems. So there's your inlet. Now, on a HPA reg, the fill adapter, I design it so that basically the components sit like this. Basically, the fill adapter sits up here, the regulator actually sits with the adjustment knob facing outwards, and then on top of that, I run my pressure gauge. So, when looking from behind, it's still going to be the same thing. I'm still putting the pressure gauge up here. So, proceed with the same process. Pull out your tape. Get rid of any excess. And proceed to thread your pressure gauge on. Now, you don't have to have a pressure gauge, but because this is Nerf, and I strongly advise never using more than 100 psi, unless you absolutely know what you're doing, and you're absolutely sure that your fittings aren't going to explode on you, and that is an absolute never. You are never sure that your fittings are not going to explode. Therefore, never use it above 100 psi. And in the applications that I use, I never even use 100 psi. So I'd really not recommend going above that. If you do, you must want to hurt someone, and I think you're a bad person if you do that. So thread that on, adjust. I should add, this rig here is not actually mine. I'm helping a friend set up his, so I'm using all the same components I did in mine, and so I will add with that's actually quite useful, because it means that he's going to be able to use my setup, and I'll be able to use his, etc, etc. Circle jerks for everybody! Alright, so pressure gauge is a bit of an angle here. I'm going to tighten that just a little more because I like things to be nice and square where possible. So that's mostly square. The bottle faces out from the body, so I like the pressure gauge to face out as well. It means that when you look down from the top of the bottle, you'll see pretty much both gauges. You'll see how this bottle gauge is here and this gauge is here. You can see bottle pressure, output regulated pressure. So the bottle's currently empty because I'd sold it depressurized as a means of being safe. This is just a plug. Now, on my personal rig, I use both of these outlets, both these threaded outlets here, as outputs. I've actually got this fitting and this fitting threaded into these, both, but I've got a right angle here, so I've got two output hoses, which means I can run two output blasters. It doesn't mean I can run them at separate pressures, but it does mean that I can run two blasters at the same pressure. There are Ninja dual fill adapters, and that means you can run two regulators, but that's way more expensive than I really think, and believe me, this rig wasn't cheap to begin with. But, at the same time, if you want to spend the extra money to have a dual regulatable, dual output system, I'm not stopping you. Hell, if you want to go quad, but you've only got two arms. Just remember that. And, personally, I regulate my setup to 50 to 60 psi usually, so that is a sufficient pressure for what I want to achieve. Thread tape, on plug. This is a plugged outlet. It's just going to stop the air flowing out. There's nothing special about it, but it is still essential for you to plug this output, because if you don't plug this output, you end up with having basically, well, I mean, imagine what happens if you leave the hose running. That's essentially the same outcome. You get nothing. You win nothing. You achieve nothing. You waste your air. So that's nice and threaded in. All these are actually a lot further out than the fittings that I used. Mine actually sat all flush. But pneumatic fittings still have some tolerances in them, so don't be disappointed if they sit too far out. It's just a part of the game. Lastly, this is my outlet. I've chosen this because this is actually a quick disconnect fitting in its own right. So this will thread into here as fine, and then into here as fine. My hose is actually disconnectable from this sit. It means that in an instance, if I need to, I can pull this collar, and basically the hose will pop out, cut off the airflow, and it acts as a good safety as well as a seal. It means if something has gone wrong in the blaster, I have three means of safeties. I have one on the fill adapter, which turns on and off as needed. I have one in the actual hose connection, which seals off if I disconnect the hose, and I have a seal finally connected to the hose itself, which I don't have here, because this isn't my rig. So we'll just go ahead and put again the last thread. This is fairly simple stuff. I reckon if I told my 3-year-old nephew to do it, he could do it, although I'm probably sure he'd also probably eat some of the tape in the process. Better recover his face in it. Don't know why he likes pink so much. So this fitting's actually got a really good tolerance on it, so it's going to get close to flush by the time I'm finished. Again, adjustable wrench out, tighten around, thread, thread. Yeah, so this one will actually pretty much fit in flush, and there's all the resistance I need, and it's mostly flush. Carry on. Now, this is the only 1/4 inch thread in this regulator, or after this regulated fitting. I couldn't find any like quick disconnect fittings in 1/8, otherwise I would have just plugged it straight into the regulator. So this was a bit of mix and match, but the output is always going to be mix and match, as are the rest of the components. This is how I do it, and Coop did it a different way, but Coop also did it in a in a way that was effective for the time that he did it in. He used a much more, well, I guess easy to assemble set because he was using all paintball fittings. The problem with his setup was its slow flow rate, and that's all well and good if you're okay to sit there and wait the extra second for your 4B tank to fill up, but I'm not a very patient person, and I like automatic blasters, so I built around that. So there's that. That'll be the last thread for today, and just thread that on like that. So that's mostly sealed, and by the time this thread's on all the way, it should seal. I can't actually test the seal though because I don't currently have any air on me. So there's that, like so, and there you go. That is basically an assembled second stage regulator. Again, imagine the fill adapter sitting just above here. So I'll see if I can get a video when I actually install this into the fill adapter and what I did there, and why I did what I did there, because I did something a little differently that I'll explain then. Otherwise, that's all there is to it.